Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Shabbos Daf Kuf Chav Beis. We are on Daf Kuf Chav Aleph Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara related a story in the name of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. Now the Gemara is going to give us conclude with 3 additional halacha statements in the name of Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. Says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Amar Rabbi Chanina. So this halacha is in the name of Rabbi Chanina, which is Pamoites Shel Beis Rebbe. So these Pamoites, these candelabras, these menorahs, Shel Beis Rebbe, of the household of Rebbe, Mutal Tatlum Shabbos. One may be metaltal and move them on Shabbos. They're not muktzah. Now Rashi points out. Let's perhaps take a look at Rashi inside on the bottom line of the Amud. So towards the end, beginning with the word Pamoites, says Rashi menorahs, these candelabras, v'loy shel chulyos hayu. Now we must note these were not made of chulyos parts. They were one-piece menorahs. Why? Because as we learned earlier in the Masech, there's a concern if there are parts there that perhaps it might drop and come apart, and he might be tempted to reassemble the parts. So in that case, there's a concern of a malacha. However, we're speaking about pamoites which were one-piece pamoites, and therefore there's no concern, and therefore they're not muktzah. Continues the Gemara. Amalei Reb Zera. So Reb Zera wanted to know. He asked him, are you referring to small size menorahs or even large heavy ones? B'nitolim b'yodei achas? Are you referring to small pamoites which can be even handled with one hand? Or b'shtei yadayim, or the large heavy ones which need to be handled with 2 hands? Are those mutter betiltal as well? Amar Alei, so Rabbi Abba told him, Ka'oson shel beis avicha. We're referring to those pamoites which are similar to the ones used in your home. So Rashi points out here, the top line, shel beis avicha, the ktanos hayu, which were small sized ones which can be moved with one hand. Aval gdolos, but large sized ones which are heavy. Adam kaveh lehem makom, one designates a specific place for them, lets them sit in their place. They're not meant to be moved around. They're not considered to be a kli, since they're meant to remain in position, and therefore they are muktzah. So yes, it is specifically ones which are small sized ones, light ones, which can be moved around, b'yodei achas, and therefore they're considered to be a kli and not muktzah. Now, evidently we're speaking about the menorah which was not used this Shabbos, perhaps it was never used, and therefore there's no concern about the muktzah machmas iser or muktzah machmas, the flame that was sitting on it. So we're speaking about, we're not speaking about that concern. We're speaking about the other concern, the fact that it's heavy and it's designated, it's meant to stay in place. Therefore, it does not have the shame of kli with regard to muktzah, and therefore it is not movable on Shabbos. Continues the Gemara. V'amar Rav Abba Bar Kahana, Amar Reb Chanina, Kroinis shel beis Rebbe. So these wagons which are meant to transport people, the kroinis of the household of Rebbe, mutal tatlum Shabbos. When we move them on Shabbos, they're not muktzah. Amalei Reb Zera. So Reb Zera again wanted to know, b'nitolim b'adam echad. Are we speaking about the small size one, which can be transported, moved around by one person? Are we speaking about the large size ones, which need 2 people to move them around? Amar Lei. So once again he responded to him, Ka'oson shel beis avicha. We're only speaking about those small size ones, similar to the ones used in your household and in your father's home, and therefore it's not muktzah, it's transportable, it's mobile, and can be moved on Shabbos. A third halacha, V'amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Hitalem Rabbi Chanina, Lebeis Rebbe. So Rabbi Chanina allowed the household of Rebbe lishtes yayin b'kroinish shel nachri, to drink wine which was transported b'kroinish shel nachri, in these wagons of the guy. So the nachri delivered the Jewish wine. We know that one may not drink the wine of a guy, nor even wine of a yid which was tampered by a guy. So this Jewish wine which was delivered by the guy, Rabbi Chanina allowed them to drink it b'chaisom echad, although it only had 1 seal protecting it. Now generally the Shittas Chachamim is that we need 2 seals. So how come he allowed even with 1 seal? V'lo yadana. So Rav Abba is speaking, he's saying, I'm not sure, I don't know what the exact reason was. Whether Reb Chanina holds like Reb Elazar's Shita, who maintains that even one chaysim is sufficient to secure the yain. Imashum aims to the Beinasiyah, or perhaps, generally speaking, he requires 2 chaysamis to allow the drinking of this wine. Here it's different because of the amos of the fear, the Beinasiyah of the home of the Nasi. So the guy has fear; he's afraid of the household of Rebbe, the Nasi, which was appointed by the Malchus, by the king. Therefore, he does not. He's dissuaded from going ahead and tampering with this wine. Therefore, even 1 seal is sufficient in this case. So, in summary, Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana taught us 3 things: that those small size menorahs, likewise the small size kroinos. So he said the halacha in the name of Reb Chanina, they are not considered to be muktzah. And then he concluded with the halacha of the wine delivered to the home of Rebbe, that there was even 1 chaysam and it was sufficient. He wasn't sure whether it was because that is the general halacha. So Reb Chanina holds that even 1 chaysam is sufficient, like the Shita of Reb Elazar, or specifically here because of the fear, the ema of the Nasi. Continues the Mishnah. We know one cannot instruct a guy to do a malacha for him. We learned that yesterday. What if a Nachri, a Gentile, decides to light the nair, the lamp, the candle? Mishtamish la'iri Yisrael. So it's okay for a Yid to go ahead and benefit from the illumination of the nair, because the Nachri lit it for himself. He didn't do it specifically for the Yisrael. He didn't do it upon the instruction of the Yisrael. V'im bishvil Yisrael aser. But if we know that the Nachri lit this nair for the sake, for the benefit of the Yisrael, although the Yisrael didn't instruct him to light it, it's aser. The Yisrael cannot benefit from this nair. The reason being that we're concerned that if we allow this, then he might be tempted to actually instruct him to light the candle next time. So there's a gzera here. Now the question is, generally we don't make a gzera on top of another gzera. The initial isser, amir la'akum, of telling the guy to do a malacha is only isser d'Rabbanan. So how can we go ahead and add another safeguard to that and say, well, even if you didn't actually instruct him, he cannot even benefit, have enough from the malacha of a guy, for concern that he might instruct him. It's a double gzera. And the Farshim say that it's chad gzera here. It's considered to be one and the same gzera, because one thing leads to the next. So both gzeras perhaps were established at one time, and it's interrelated, interconnected. You can't separate between these 2 things. If he enjoys the benefit of the malacha of a goy, this will come in to go ahead and tell him, and to go tell him and to do the malacha, and therefore the Chachamim prohibited both aspects of this situation. So the hana is aser. And generally speaking, when we say that it's asr, we mean to say that he can't enjoy it on Shabbos, and he needs to wait, even Motzei Shabbos, he needs to wait a certain amount of time, as the Gemara will tell us. It needs to wait the amount of time which would theoretically suffice to have this malacha done. So therefore, he's not benefiting from the fact that the malacha is done on Shabbos. So that's the first case of the Mishnah, that if the Nachri lit the candle, the Yisrael can have anah, provided that he didn't do it for the sake of the Yisrael. Continues the Mishnah, Milei Mayim, Ashkes Behemtoi. What if the Nachri drew water from this boir, and this pit in Rishus Harabim, which is considered to be, this boir is deep enough to be considered Rishus HaYachid, and he goes and he draws water for his animal, he brings out water into the Rishus Harabim, so he does the Malacha of Haitzah, but the Nachri did it Ashkes Behemtoi, to feed his own animal. Mashka Achrav Yisrael, Yisrael could come along and use the remnants of the water, the remaining mayim, to feed his animal, because he can have anah from the malacha of the guy, because he did it for his own sake. He acted out of his own self-interest. Yisrael also, but if he did it for the sake of the Yisrael, once again, this would be aser. A third case, also nachri kevesh leirid boy. What if this large ship arrives at port and the nachri builds this gangplank, this kevesh, this ramp, layered by to descend, to go down, come off the ship, to disembark. Yered Achav Yisrael. The Yisrael can go ahead and follow suit, use the kevesh, go down the kevesh behind the guy. V'imish Yisrael aser. But here as well, if the Goy did it specifically for the Yisrael, it's awesome. Says the Mishnah Maaseh b'Rab Gamliel v'Askenim. There's a story regarding Gamliel and the elders Shayban Besfina who were coming with their ships. They arrived on Shabbos. V'asa Nachri kevesh le'ered by. So the Nachri designed, fashioned this kevesh, this ramp, to come off the ship. V'yard by Rab Gamliel v'Askenim. And Gamliel and Askenim used this kevesh as well because it wasn't done for them. The Nachri did it, built it for his own sake. So they went ahead and had anah from this kevesh because they were simply using something that the guy did for himself. Continues the Gemara. The Mishnah gives us 3 examples. If the Nachri lights a candle, he draws water for his animal, and he builds this ramp. In all cases, the Yisrael can benefit from it provided the Nachri didn't do it for the sake of the Yisrael. Says the Gemara Tzricha. The Mishnah needs to give us all 3 examples. Why are they all 3 needed? The answer is the Yashmina Ner. If the Mishnah would simply tell us the case of the Ner, I would say, well, you know why over there, when the Nachri lights the Ner for his own personal gain, certainly the Yisrael can go ahead and have anah from it. Why? Mishum de Ner la'echad, Ner la'meya. Because the Ner can equally benefit 100 people, just as it benefits one person. The same Ner can be enjoyed by one person and by 100 people. Therefore, there's no concern there that the guy added, he increased for the Yid, he lit the candle for himself. And the Yisrael is merely having an incidental anah, he's benefiting from the same Ner. There's no concern of adding, of being moiseh for the Yisrael. Aval ma'ayim, but in the case of the water, ligzar, we should make it clear, we should prohibit it. Why? Dilma asel afushi v'shvil Yisrael. Out of concern that perhaps the guy will actually add quantity, will add more water for the Yisrael. He sees the Yisrael needs to feed his animal. Perhaps he's going to be a nice guy and going to add some water. So perhaps in that case, it should be an isser. We should not allow the Yisrael even to use the leftover water for concern that the guy will be tempted to add for him. Mishnah tells us, no, it's okay. As long as it appears the guy did it for his own sake, simply some water left over, the Yisrael can use the leftover water. Okay, so that explains the first 2 cases. What about the third case? The kevesh lamali. Why the case of the kevesh? It would seem that the gangplank is simply a mirror case of the first case of the ner, because one ramp is useful for 1 and for 100 people at the same time. There's no adding here. There's no chashash that he added anything for the Yisrael. So once the Mishnah already gave us the case of the ner, why does the Mishnah repeat the case of the kevesh? The kevesh lamali. So once we have the ner and the water, why add the kevesh? Says the Gemara, Maaseh during Gamliel v'Askenim kamash malon. The Mishnah is simply trying to illustrate this halacha in a practical case that we see that the Rab Gamliel and the Askenim actually fulfilled this halacha l'maisa. So they relied on this halacha in actuality. Let's take a look at the Rashi inside here. So Rashi here is beginning from the Gemara, which is it's about 10 lines from the top, beginning with the word ner le'echad ner le'mea. So one candle is useful for one person, as it's useful for 100. Kiva the nachru le'tzarchei likai, since the guy lit it for his own sake, for his own personal benefit. Lekel le'meimar. There's no concern, there's no reason to say b'shvil Yisrael afish, that he actually added for Yisrael. There's no adding here. It's the same thing that's being used for him as for them. Kevesh lamali. Why state the story, the halacha of the kevesh? Hadumi de neru, because it's similar to the ner. Kevesh lecha, kevesh lamei. The same ramp used for one is used by many. So why does the Mishnah need to state that halacha? And the Gemara says, well, the Gemara wanted to show us the story of Rab Gamliel and the skin. Continues the Gemara. Taner Abana, we learned in the Brayso, Nachri shaliket asavim. If a Nachri gathered grass, so he cut grass for his animal, Machal Achav Yisrael, so the Yisrael can go follow afterwards and feed the leftover grass to his animal. V'im b'shvil Yisrael, but if we know that he actually cut the grass for the sake of the Yisrael, Asur, the Yisrael may not benefit from the grass. Likewise, milei mayim lashkes behemtoi. If the Nachri filled water, he drew water out of this bar, Lashkes behemtoi, to feed his animal, mashkach v'Yisrael, the Yisrael can go ahead and use the leftovers for his animal. V'im b'shvei Yisrael asa, but if he did it for the sake of Yisrael, it's asa. Ba'ameh devarim amurim. When is this halacha said, this allowance, that the Yisrael can use the leftovers? She'ein ma'kiroi. If the Nachri does not know the Yisrael, he's not his acquaintance, he doesn't know him, abal ma'kiroi aser. But if he knows him, then it's aser. Because at this point in the Gemara, Rashi explains, the Gemara figures the reason is because since he knows him, we assume that he also had him in mind. So he did it for his own sake, but he also did it for the sake of the Yisrael. So that is the reason why it's asur. Says the Gemara, is that so, that when the Nachri knows, he's familiar with the Yisrael, then it's asur? Va'amar, actually the Gemara is asking differently. Eini, how can you say that when the Nachri cut the grass, the Yisrael can go ahead and use the leftover grass for his animal? Is that so? Is that mutter? Eini va'amar Rav Huna amar Rav Chanina ma'amid adam behemtoi al gab asavim b'Shabbos. One may position his behema on top of asavim, grass, which is currently attached to the ground. So he may go ahead and position his animal there to eat freely. Avaloi al gabe muktzah b'Shabbos, but he cannot place his animal, position him on something which is muktzah for him to eat. Why? Because there's a concern. Perhaps he'll be tempted to move the muktzah, pick it up, and help his animal eat, because muktzah is only Issa d'Rabbanan. In contrast to the grass, the asavim attached to the ground, which is no concern that he'll go ahead and rip off grass, give it to his animal, because it's a malacha d'oraisa. So we have that distinction. When it comes to asavim, he can go ahead and position his animal without any concern. Whereas when it comes to something which is muktzah, which is only asavim d'Rabbanan, for instance, something which was attached to the ground at the onset of Shabbos, and now somehow became detached, it's considered to be muktzah. So you cannot position his animal there, because he might go ahead and actually lift the muktzah. So how can we say that the Yisrael can go ahead and allow his animal to eat the leftover grass which the guy harvested on Shabbos, and which it's muktzah because it was attached to the ground during the beginning of Shabbos? It wasn't prepared, it wasn't useful, it wasn't fit for use, it's muktzah. So how can we say that he can position his animal there? Says the Gemara, ba'apa. So we're not speaking about he actually positioned his animal there, but rather the kaimla ba'apa, that the owner stood in front of the animal, and she went, as a result of his strategic positioning himself in front of the animal, he somehow influenced he caused the animal to go ahead and walk onto the go to the get near the grass. And she went and ate, meaning he wasn't standing right by the grass, in which case there's no concern of him moving muktzah. Now, interesting, Taisus points out, how can one position his animal on top of grass on Shabbos? We know that even an animal, a Jewish animal, is meant to rest from malacha on Shabbos, and ripping out grass from the ground is a malacha. It's interesting. Perhaps interesting to see Taisus inside here. So Taisus is 3 lines from the bottom of the Amud, beginning with the words Mamid Adam Behemte Al Gabi Asavim B'Shabbos. So Taisus brings the Mechilta v'Kedashinan b'Mechilta L'man Yonuach Sharcha v'Chamarcha. The pasuk says so that your shar and your chamar should rest on Shabbos. Yocher lo yalichenu toilish. Perhaps I would think he must rest. Completely rest, refrain from doing malachas. You shouldn't allow him to cut off some plant from the ground. You shouldn't allow him to uproot something, which is a malacha. Talmud Laima, the pasuk says, "Laman yonuach." He meant to have him rest on Shabbos. It's not called resting. This is tormenting the animal. You're restricting him. You're locking him up. You're not letting him live freely. So we learn from this drasha that certainly the animal can go ahead and engage in malach if he's doing it for his own pleasure and benefit. We're not meant to have the animal work for us, but if the animal decides to go out and cut some grass, it's okay. So that explains why he can position his animal on the asavim, but he cannot position the animal on top of muktzah for concern that the owner might be tempted to move the muktzah. But as the Gemara says, apparently we're speaking about a case where he's actually not standing near the muktzah, but he's causing his animal to go to the muktzah, in which case it's mutter. Okay, let's get back to the halacha of makiroi amar. So we just learned earlier about mendav amurim. This halacha, this allowance for the Yisrael to eat the leftover, to feed his animal the leftover grass, is only she'ein makiroi. If the guy doesn't know the Yid, he's not his acquaintance, in which case we assume that he's only doing it for his own personal benefit and not for the Yisrael. Aval makiroi asr, but if he knows the Yisrael, then it's asr because we assume that he had him in mind, and therefore he also did it for the Yisrael. Says the Gemara, one second, let's go back to our Mishnah. We have a story of Rav Gamliel, who's traveling together with a guy in the boat. He was his travel companion. Apparently he knew him, he was sitting together with him, he was traveling with him. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says that if the guy who built this kevesh for himself, Rav Gamliel was allowed to use the ramp, despite the fact that he was makiri. Says the Gemara, Rav Gamliel makiri hava. Rav Gamliel was somebody who the Nachri knew. So how was he allowed to use the ramp? Amar Abai shaloi b'fanav hava. The Mishnah was speaking about a case where Rav Gamliel was not present, was not b'fanav, was not in front of the guy when he built the ramp. So according to Abai, the restriction, the limitation of makiroi only applies when the Nachri is doing it in front of the Yid, in which we assume that since he's doing it b'fanav, he really has him in mind. He's doing it primarily, he's trying to impress the Yid. He's trying to demonstrate that he's trying to help him. So in this case, it takes on a new form. It takes on a new meaning. The malacha of the guy, even though he's doing it for his own personal benefit, but if he's doing it in front of the Yid and he knows that the Yid is going to benefit from it, it is regarded as though he's doing it primarily for the Yid, and therefore it's asur. However, in the case of Rav Gamliel, since he wasn't present when the Nachri built the kevesh, it's okay, despite the fact that he knew it. Rav Amar, Rav has a different approach. This halacha of makira is asur is only in the case where there's concern that he's going to increase his malacha for the sake of the Yisrael. But simply the fact that he's present, that's okay. Rav Amar, even if you'll say that Rav Gamliel was present when the Nachri built the kevesh, there's no concern. Ner le'echad, ner le'meir. This was the term we used earlier. A candle is useful for one, as useful for 100. He's not adding anything. When 100 people come and use the illumination of this ner, which he lit for himself, it's okay because he's not adding anything to benefit the 100 people. Likewise, in the case of the kevesh, it's the same ramp used for one as for 100. And since there's no concern of any addition here, of any increasing, there's no riboy malacha done, therefore there's no concern. So according to Rava, the restriction of makiroi only applies to a circumstance where there's concern, perhaps there's a chashash, that he was marba b'shviloi, that he added something, that he increased the malacha in order to benefit the Yid that he knows. But in a case such as a kevesh, where there's no such option, there's no isser. So in conclusion, the isser of makiri, according to Abaye, is strictly when it's b'fanav. Then we regard the malacha as though it's done primarily for the Yid who is present there. But according to Rava, there's no concern of b'fanav. Makiri only applies where there's a concern, perhaps, that he increased the malacha for the sake of the Yisrael, such as in the case of the grass, which the guy picked for his animal, or in the case of the water which he drew, which he was doile for his animal. Those cases, certainly, if he's makira, there's a concern because he may have added something for the Yisrael. So according to Rava, that is the criteria. Continues the Gemara. We have a kasha. Meisve. Let's ask a kasha from the following brayse. From the following brayse, Amar Gamliel turned to the other chachamim, other skanim. He said, "We'll have to use this kevesh. Since the Nachri built it out of our presence, let's go down. Let's use the kevesh." So clearly, it is only because it was shaloi b'faneinu. Apparently, this is a right Abai and a kasha Rava. Says let's say hoyel v'asay nered boy. Gamliel was simply saying, since look, he made it already. He built the kevesh for himself. Let's go use it. Let's descend. Let's go down the gangplank. The fact that he used the word shaloi b'faneinu That's simply incidental. That's happens to be that it was done out of its presence, but that wasn't the reason. That's not a precondition for allowing the use of this kevish. That's how Rav is going to answer this brayse. Continues the Gemara with another kasha. Tashma, come and listen to the following brayse. So you have a city in which there are Yisrael and Nachrim living in it. And you have a merchatz, a bathhouse, which is operating on Shabbos. They're heating it up on Shabbos. So if most of the inhabitants, most of the customers of this bathhouse are Nachrim, then a Yisrael may go and use this Beis HaMerchatz immediately after Shabbos. He can do so right after Shabbos without any concern. Since most customers are Goyim, we consider the malacha of heating up the merchatz, the water in the merchatz, etc., as being done for the sake of the Goyim, and therefore the Yisrael can use it right after Shabbos without any delay. However, in Rav Yisrael, if most of the customers are Yisrael, in that case, Yamtin b'kedei sheyichim uchamen, then the Yisrael cannot use it right after Shabbos. He has to wait a certain amount of time. B'kedei sheyichim uchamen, that enough time needs to elapse, which would allow, theoretically, to cook up the water in the Beis HaMerchatz. This is done so that the Yisrael should not really benefit from the fact that the Beis HaMerchatz was warmed up on Shabbos. So, here we have a case where it was not warmed up in front of the Yisrael, nor was there any chashash of adding for the Yisrael. As Rashi explains, because the process of warming up the merchatz is a standard procedure, done for a few, done for many. It's the same procedure. There's no chashash of adding or increasing the malacha. So why do we say that it's aser? Fine, we're speaking about most customers are Yisrael. So let's say this can be equated with the case of makiroi. Just as when the guy knows the yid, we say it's aser. Likewise here, the bathhouse attendant who's warming up the merchatz, it's as though he knows the recipient, the yid, because since most are Yisraelim, so it's regarded as though he knows the recipient who is going to benefit from his malacha. But both those conditions presented by Abai and Rava are not present here. It's not b'fanav. He's not adding anything, so why is it us? Says the Gemara, Hasam, in that case over there, ki mechamemi, adata de ruba mechamemi. That case is very different, because when they warm up this Beis HaMerchatz, this bathhouse, adata de ruba mechamemi, they're heating it up with the majority in mind. Meaning, if most customers are Yisrael, so they're doing it for the sake of Yisrael. It's not as though the guy did it for himself. And the question is, could Yisrael benefit incidentally from the malacha of the guy? Why is he heating up this bathhouse? Why is the attendant getting involved in operating this bathhouse? He's doing it for his customers. Now, if most of his customers are Yisrael, then his malacha is regarded like a malacha for the sake of Yisrael. It's a direct malacha for the sake of Yisrael. Certainly, it's aser. Continues the Gemara. Tashma. Let's take a look at the following brayse. Tashma, come and listen. If there is a ner, a lamp, which is lit by a mesiba, by this party, by this banquet, and it was lit on Shabbos. If most guests at this mesiba are goyim, mutar l'shtamash l'oira, then the Yisrael can benefit from the illumination. However, if they're mostly Yisrael, asur, then he cannot enjoy the benefit. Mechza asur, if it's 50-50, likewise it's asur. Rashi explains because it's hard to determine whether or not it's for Yisrael or the Goy, because 50-50, so we regard it as though it's being done for the Yisrael and it's asur. Says the Gemara, we have a kasha from here on Rava, because in this case, once again, although most are Yisrael, and therefore it is as though the one lighting the candle is makir, he knows his recipient, since most of the banquet goers here are Yisraelim, so it's considered like makiroi. He knows them. He's doing it for the sake of his customers, who are Yisraelim. But there's no adding here. It's ner le'echad, ner le'meya. It's the same ner, which one benefits from as 100. There's no adding here. And according to Rav, even in the case of makiri, it's only asur, provided that there's a concern of being marba, of adding, of increasing the malacha for the sake of Yisrael. So why is this case asur? Says Mahasam Nami. There as well. Ki madliki adata the ruler madliki. When they light the lamp at the Mesiba, why are they doing it? They're doing it for the sake of the guests at the party. Therefore, what determines the nature of the malacha? Most of the guests. If most are Yisraelim, then the malacha is being regarded as though it was directly done for the sake of Israel. Therefore, it's asur. It's a direct malacha for Israel. It's not something which the guy does for himself, and Israel is merely having a incidental hana. The person who lit this lamp at the Mesiba is doing it for the guests of the Mesiba, for the Orchim. If most Orchim are Yisraelim, then the malacha was done directly for Israel. Continues the Gemara. Shmuel ikla lebei Abentern. Shmuel visited the home of Abentern. Asau Nachri. So this Nachri came along. Adik Shraga. He lit a candle. Adrinu Shmuel ape. The Shmuel turned around. He didn't want to benefit from the hana here. He was concerned perhaps that the guy did it for the Israel. Kiv on the chaza the icy star. But once he saw the guy brought along a document with Kokori and he was reading, now it was apparent that evidently he lit this flame, the lamp, for his own sake. Amar Shmuel now said, "Adaited nafshei udadlik." Now I see that he did it adaited nafshei for his own sake, for his own benefit. Adrinu iu lapei gavishraga. So Shmuel turned his face back around towards the shraga, towards the lamp, and he benefited from the art. Hadran loch kol kisvi. So in summary, we learned about a nachi who did a malacha. So it depends. If he did it for his own sake, he lit a candle, he drew water, he built this ramp, he did it for his own sake. The Yisrael may have enough from it, because he didn't do it for the Yisrael, he did it for himself. What if the Nachri was Makiroi? He knew the Yisrael, he was his acquaintance, he knew him, and we assume that he's doing it also for the sake of the Yisrael. It's asur. Now Abaye and Rav have different approaches. Abaye says it's specifically when the Yisrael was present, it was b'fanav, in which case it is as though he directed his masa for the Yisrael. He demonstrated his care for him, out of respect, he wanted to impress him, etc. In this case, we regard the masa as primarily having been done for the sake of Yisrael and asur. Whereas Rabbi says no, the concern is only strictly in the case where there's a chashash, that he was marba b'shvila, that he increased in the malacha. As opposed to the case of the candle, where this option does not exist. The Gemara concluded that if the bathhouse attendant or the fellow preparing the meal there, he lit the light for the mesiba, in which case we follow the roiv. If roiv of the customers of the bathhouse are Yisraelim, or roiv of the guests at the party are Yisraelim, it is asur, because the ma'isa in this case is regarded as though it was done directly to Yisrael, in which case it's asur. Continues the Mishnah. Kol ha'kelim nitolim b'Shabbos. All these kelim which have doors, for instance, a closet, so all these things that have doors, nitolim b'Shabbos. So the kli may be moved on Shabbos, but that's the same anymore, and the doors may be transported with the kli itself. It's okay. It's part of the kli. Afal pishin is sparku. Even if the doors broke off, they became detached, they are still not muktzah. Why? Because then it can't be equated to the doors of a house. Those doors, when they fall off the house, they're muktzah. Because those are not prepared. They're considered to be muktzah because they're part of the house, and when they get detached from the house, they're muktzah. As opposed to the case of the dalsis, of these doors, of these kelim, which are not muktzah, even when they come off the kli. Let's take a look at Rashi inside, who explains this very thoroughly. So Rashi here is right at the beginning of the Mishnah. So it's about 7-8 lines from the top, beginning with the words Kol ha'kelim nitolim b'Shabbos v'dal sasei mimoy. Explains Rashi, Kol ha'kelim sheyesh lem dalsis, all types of kelim which have these doors, kigon shida teva migdal, nitolim b'Shabbos, so they can be moved on Shabbos. V'dalsis sheyesh lem b'tzidon imohen, and the dalsis which these things have on their sides, nitolim imohen, can be transported together with the or the kli, and the chiddush is v'afal pishin esparku had losses min hakelim. Even though those doors came off the kli, nital, they can still be moved. They're not muktzah. Vein doimel dasas habayis. They're not similar to the door of a home. She'ein nital, which cannot be moved, which are considered to be muktzah when they come off the doorpost. Lefi, why? Shadalses habayis eina min hamuchan letaltal. They're not prepared for moving as is. They're meant to stay on the doorpost. They're meant to stay on the house. She'ein a kli, they're not considered to be a kli. So when they break off the doorpost, they're muktzah. They're not a kli, they're part of the home, a broken piece of the home. It's muktzah. Aval elu, but in contrast to these, aval elu hein kli agavim. These doors are considered to be a kli agavim. Agavim means on account of their father, meaning they're still considered a part of the primary kli. Meaning, these doors were initially part of a kli, not part of a home, part of a kli which is mobile, which is transportable. So even now when they break off, as Tosis points out, it's still right to be put back and reattached, reassembled. Therefore, it doesn't lose any status. It's still considered to be part of the original kli. So it was a kli, and it remains a kli, and therefore it's transportable, and it is not muktzah. Continues the Mishnah. Noitel adam kornus. One may go ahead and take a kornus, a hammer. Lefatzea boyisei goizim. He may go ahead and crack with it nuts on Shabbos. Kardaim, likewise he can take a saw. Lachtach boyisei dveila. And use it to cut. The kardaim means an axe. Lachtach boyisei dveila, to hack cut up the dveila, this large glob of dried figs. Megera, he can take a saw, lager bas hagvina, and use it to saw through, to chop cheese. Magreif, he can take a rake, lager bas hagregeres, to gather rake together the gregeres, the dried figs in the barrel. As harachas, as hamazlig, other types of tools. Rachas is some type of winnowing shovel. As hamalges is some type of pitchfork. He can use it for permissible use. Lasalv l'katan, he can use it to feed his cotton. You can use that as a toothpick to insert into a fruit, into a berry. Esakush v'esakarka, these are actually the rachas samalges los olakotim means to place on it. You can feed with these things. You can feed his cotton. You can place some food on these on the shovel or the pitchfork. In the next case, we have the pointy ones. Esakush v'esakarka. Kush is a rod used. They wrap the threads around it. So some sort of pointy rod. Karka is a pointy tool, use a weaving tool. Lischayiv boy, he can use it. He could poke it into a fruit. Use it as a toothpick. Machat shel yad, he can use a hand knitting, meaning a sewing needle. Little by sakoitz, to remove with it a splinter. B'shel sakoim, likewise he can use this larger needle used for sewing together sacks. He can use that, liftech b'sadelas, use it to open a door if he lost his key. So these are examples of the various kelim which seem to be muktzah kelim. They're generally used for malachos. But if he needs it for permissible use, it's mutter. Continues the Gemara. The Mishnah began, kol ha-kelim nitalim, all these kelim which feature doors attached to them, they can be moved on Shabbos. And the Mishnah tells us that even though the door broke off, now, the Mishnah seems to be telling us that even though they broke off on Shabbos, that's how the Mishnah reads. Kol ha-kelim nitalim b'Shabbos, but at the same time, even though they broke off, it appears to be implying that even on Shabbos, even though this kli got detached on Shabbos and the doorway came off on Shabbos. So although it happened on Shabbos, don't think it's muktzah. No, you can move it. Needless to say, this happened during the weekday, certainly it's not muktzah. So it seems like the Mishnah is telling us that there's a greater chiddush when something breaks on Shabbos. Perhaps I would think it broke on Shabbos itself, it's muktzah. So the Mishnah seems to be telling us that on Shabbos is a greater chiddush than if it would happen merely during the week. There's no need to say that if it happened during the week that it's not muktzah, because if it happened back during the weekday, certainly it's not muktzah. Says the Gemara, 1 second, Adarabah, just the opposite. Shabbos, if this thing cracked off on Shabbos, then there's less reason for muktzah. You know why? Mechonan al gabi avian. because these doors were prepared on account of their father. Meaning, when Shabbos arrives, at the onset of Shabbos, at the beginning of Shabbos, where were these doors? They were attached to the parent kli, they were attached to the primary kli. And they were still perfectly useful as part of the kli. So although it broke on Shabbos, there's no muktzah here. Because since at the first point of Shabbos they weren't muktzah, so there's less reason. There's reason to say that it's not muktzah. It doesn't just become muktzah. However, b'choil, perhaps if it would happen during the weekday, in that case, there's a greater reason for muktzah. They're not prepared, they're not fit to be used as part of their the primary kli, meaning at the onset of Shabbos, where were they? They were detached from the kli. So in this case, there's a greater reason for muktzah. So the Svar is just the opposite. Why does the Mishnah tell us that even though it broke off on Shabbos, it's not muktzah, implying that that's a greater chiddush? Perhaps I would think if it breaks off on Shabbos, it's muktzah, but certainly if it breaks off during the weekday, it's not muktzah. Just the opposite. When something breaks off on Shabbos, depending on the situation, but there's less reason for muktzah when something breaks off on Shabbos, because at the onset of Shabbos, it was part of the ikar kli, it was muchan. And generally, the onset of Shabbos is what determines the din, the status of an item on Shabbos, as opposed to something which already broke off previously, prior to Shabbos. In which case, perhaps, there's a greater reason for muktzah, because it wasn't part of the kli. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, you're right. The Mishnah never intended on telling us that. Hachi kamar. This is what the Mishnah means to say. Kol ha-kelim atom b'Shabbos. All these kelim are moved on Shabbos, but that's the same imar, and their doors together with them. Although they came apart during the weekday, they can still be moved on Shabbos, because as we learned, they still have a din of a kli. Even the door which is attached is still regarded as part of the kli, and it's not muktzah. So the Mishnah is not telling us that even though broken on Shabbos, it's not muktzah. The words afal pi nisparku is not going back to the word b'Shabbos mentioned earlier. Rather, it's going on a case where it broke up during the weekday, in which case it's a greater chiddush, even though it was already broken before Shabbos. So Shabbos enters with this thing detached. Still, it's not muktzah, because it's still considered to be part of a kli. And that's a greater chiddush, because if it would happen on Shabbos, it wouldn't be such a big chiddush. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayso, Dele shel shida v'shel teva shel migdal. So these doors of the shida, some type of wagon, teva is a chest, a migdal is some type of closet. Noitlan avaloi machzir. One can detach these doors. He can remove it from its kli, avaloi machzir, but he may not return it, may not go ahead and reassemble it, reattach it. V'shalul shel tanegolim. However, a door from a lul is this chicken coop, which is actually attached to the ground, in that case, he can neither remove the door, nor restore, nor return it. Says the Gemara, Bishleima, Shalul, Shaltana Goylim. We understand why the Tana says that the door of the Elul cannot be removed, cannot be reattached, Kasavar, because the Tana holds Kivan the Machabi Bar. Since these coops are attached to the ground, Yesh binyan bekarka, yesh tira bekarka. The concept of binyan, of building, the concept of stira, of demolishing, these are two malachas amongst the 39. These concepts apply to something which is attached to the ground. So removing the door is stira, is demolishing. Reattaching the door is binyan. Elo shal shida v'shal teva shal migdal. However, when it comes to the other halacha of these chests, my kasava, what does the Tana hold? He draws that distinction between removing, which is mutter, and reattaching, which is asr. How does that work? My kasava, what does he hold? Ikasava yesh binyan b'kelim. If he holds that even with regard to kelim, there is a concept of binyan, there's a malacha of binyan, and that's why you cannot reattach that door, because he's building the kli. If so, yesh tir b'kelim. Likewise, there should be the halacha of stira by a kli. Why can't he remove it? Why do you allow him to detach that door? He's doing stira. V'i ain't stira b'kelim. Conversely, if he holds that you know why you could remove the door from the kli, because there's no concept of a malacha of stira by a kli. It only applies to something which is attached to the ground. Therefore, you can remove the door. If so, ain't binyan b'kelim. Likewise, there should be no concept of binyan by a kli, and it should be allowed to reattach that door. So how could he be machal between removing and replacing? Between stira and binyan. Omar Abai, lo'olam kasavar, yesh binyan b'kelim, v'yesh stira b'kelim. Certainly the Tana holds that binyan and stira apply to kelim just as they apply to something which is attached to the ground. The Bryce is not allowing removing the delas. V'shenitlu kamar. The Bryce is speaking about when the door was already removed. It's sitting detached. The Bryce says a detached door may not be reassembled. Amalei Rava, shtei tshuvas b'davar. I have two responses, two challenges to what you said. Chada, number one, the Nitolan Tani. The Bryce clearly said Nitolan. They can be removed. The Bryce is giving us a heter to remove the door from the Kli. V'oid, additionally, my avoloi machzirin. The Bryce says, Nitolan avoloi machzirin. But you may not restore it, you may not reattach it. Apparently, the Bryce is telling us that one thing is mutter, removal is mutter, but you may not reattach. According to you, Abai, even removing is also. So why does the Bryce use this term? Avolei machzir. Elam arava. Kasavar, the Bryce holds, ein binyan b'kelim, v'ein stira b'kelim. Indeed, a kli does not entail binyan nor stira. That only applies to something which is mechubar l'karka. And therefore the Bryce allows removing the door, because there's no concept of stira by a kli. Why then can't you reattach it? It's a isam d'rabban. Ugzera shama yitka. There's a gzera that perhaps he might be tempted to be. Yitka means to attach it properly using nails, pegs, in which case it's usr. Why is it usr? Not because of binyan, but because of the malacha of a makeh patish, meaning putting the finishing touches on something. So even when he does it to a kli, it's a malacha because it's makeh patish. Therefore the chacham didn't allow him to reattach this door to the kli for concern that he might do it properly in a manner which involves makeh patish. So in summary, we discussed doors. And we have that distinction between doors of a home or a lul shel tarnagolim, which is attached to the ground. So these are doors of structures. So these doors that come apart are muktzah, because they were part of this bias, part of this structure. They were never regarded as a kli. So when they come apart, they're considered to be useless. They don't have a din of a kli, and therefore they're muktzah. Certainly one cannot remove a door from a fixed structure, nor reattach a door, because there is a concept of binyan and stira by something which is mechubar l'karka. What about the same situation by a kli? So a door of a kli which comes apart, it's not muktzah because initially it was part of a kli, and it's presently considered to be part of a kli. It never lost its kli status. What about removing or reattaching the doors? According to Abaye, there's a concept of binyan and stira, building and demolishing, even by a kli. Therefore, Abaye says, one may not remove or reattach the door of a kli. Rava says, no. Ain binyan stira b'kelim. It's merely a kli. There's no concept of building, of demolishing. These malachas don't apply to a kli. Therefore, one can remove a door from a kli. When it comes to reattaching, true, in Torah it's mutter, because there's no binyan by a kli. Chacham were concerned, however, they didn't let him do it. For concern, Gzera Shama Yitka, they might go ahead and reattach it properly using nails, using pegs, which is doing a malacha, not of binyan, but rather makeh patish. Continues the Gemara. Noitel the Mekornos, the Mishnah told us he can take this hammer, crack nuts. Amar Rav Yehuda, Kornos shel hagoyzim, lefab tzei habois hagoyzim. He can take a hammer, which is meant to be used, which is designated miyuchad, Rashi says, leftziyas hagoyzim, for cracking nuts, and use it to crack nuts. But to use this grand hammer used by the blacksmiths, he cannot use that for cracking nuts. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds, a utensil which is designated for prohibited use, even if he intends on using it for the tzarech gufa, of its own sake, meaning he wants to use this thing for a permissible function, to crack a nut, it's asr. Now Taisus points out that this limitation of Rabbi Yehuda is limited to this type of case. We're speaking about this chashav kornus, this blacksmith's hammer, which is designated for malacha chashuv, for a prominent, significant malacha, and in which case it's not really suitable. It's not meant to be used for some inferior, minor function like cracking nuts. It's not meant for that. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda maintains it's asr. But regarding other types of kalim, which are simply designated for isser, for prohibited use, Rabbi Yehuda would agree. If it doesn't fall into this type of category of this blacksmith's hammer, it can be used. L'tzarech gufay for malacha, which is mutter. Amalei Rabba. So Rabba responds to Rabbi Yehuda, Alamiyata. If that's the case, Sefer Diktani, in the Sefer of the Mishnah, where we find that it says Vesarachaf, this amalges, he can take this shovel and this pitchfork used for malachas, Los all of a cotton to place food on it and serve his cotton. Rachas amalges, maybe after the cotton. These tools, are they designated for the cotton? Certainly not. They're meant to be used for malachas. Nevertheless, we see that one can use the L'tzarech gufay, can use the actual tool for a permissible use. Elama Rabba disagreed. One can even use a blacksmith's hammer to crack a nut. Because Rabba holds, even something which is designated for a isser purpose, and as Tosfos points out, even something which is chashuv, prominent and significant, and designated for this malacha chashuva, L'tzarech gufay mutter, it can be used for a permissible function. So, in summary, Rabbi Yehuda says this blacksmith's hammer is usher to be used for a permissible function, whereas Rabbi disagrees, he holds it is mutter. Okay, time for a brief chazorah of today's daf. We began with those three halachos mentioned in the beginning. First, regarding the menorah, then regarding the car and this wagon. The Gemara told us they're not muktzah, provided they're of a smaller variety. They can be transported, moved around by one person. This is regarding the wagon. Regarding the menorah, it can be transported simply by one hand. It's not that big, heavy one which is meant to stay in place. Therefore, these two things are not muktzah. The Gemara concluded with the wine transported by the goy for the household of Rebbe, which was mutter, according to Rabbi Chanina, mutter even merely with one seal. The Gemara was unsure for the reason, whether because Rabbi Chanina holds that one seal is generally enough, or because out of fear of the base Rebbe, there's a reason to assume that the goy did not tamper with the wine. We proceeded with the Mishnah of a Nacha did a malacha. If he did it for the sake of the Yisrael, then it's asa. But if he did it for his own personal benefit, he lit a candle, he drew water out of the well, he built this ramp, then the Yisrael may have an from it. Now, if the guy knew, he was makira, he knew the Yid, Abaye says, depends. If he did it in front of, in presence of the Yid, then it's asa. Rava says, this is only concern when we have a chashash, a concern that perhaps the guy was marba, he increased in the malach for the sake of Yisrael. We concluded that regarding for instance, the bathhouse attendant or the fellow lighting the candle by the meal, if most of the people there, most of the customers are going to be Yisraelim, in which case we regard the Maisa as though it's being done directly for Yisrael, then it's also. We learned in the Mishnah that these doorways of the batim of the homes are muktzah when they come off, when they get detached. We learned in the Gemara likewise when it comes to the lul shel tarnagolim, which is attached to the ground, that also has a din of a bias. So these things are muktzah. And when it comes to removing and reattaching those doors, one cannot, because he's doing a malacha. By removing the door, he's doing a malacha of stira. By attaching a malacha of binyan, when it comes to the doorway of a kli, those that come off are not muktzah, because they're still considered to be kalim. The Gemara told us that even if they came off during the weekdays, they're still not muktzah, because these doors are considered to be kalim. They're considered to be part of those kalim, part of the chest, part of the closet, and therefore they're not muktzah. What about removing and attaching those doors to the kalim? According to Abaye, there is a concept of a malacha of binyan and stira by a kli, and therefore one may not remove or reattach those doors. Rabbi maintains there's no concept of building or demolishing by a kli. One can remove a door from a kli. The reason why he cannot reattach it, because of a concern that he might use the nails or pegs and do a malacha makiv patish. The more concluded with machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rava regarding using this blacksmith's hammer for a permissible use, for instance, cracking those nuts. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's asur. According to Rava, it's mutter.